Operation Twin Shells has just released to the test server, and with it comes a new operator Skopos and a couple of important reworks that have mixed up the meta significantly. So with the season's full release right around the corner, in today's video I'll be doing a new updated defender tier list, same as I always do. The operators will be ranked in alphabetical order and timestamps will be in the description for your viewing needs. Now let's go ahead and get into the video. Now, the first operator I'm going to be ranking on this tier list is Alibi, and she's going to be going in the need rework tier. Alibi's gadget just doesn't cut it anymore. Her secondary gadgets aren't good either, and the only thing that really plays in her favor is the fact that she's a 3-speed with good guns. But if you take that out of the question, Alibi's an objectively weak operator that needs some form of changes to make her more viable. Now, after that, we have Aruni, who's going to be going in the A tier. Aruni is an operator that is objectively good every round, and that is because her passive ability to make rotates and head holes by just punching holes in a wall is solid. She has a DMR on defense, which is strong. Her Syria gates are strong for dealing with attacker projectiles and for slowing down a push from the attack, and she has barbed wire on top of all of that. So overall, just a really solid operator that you can get utility out of in every round. Now, Azami, on the other hand, is a little too strong, which is why she's going to be going in the S tier. I think Azami is one of the few operators left in the game that is the definition of overpowered, and that is because her Kibas can act as bulletproof cover for her team, which can be a nightmare for the attack to get rid of because they either have to dump huge amounts of bullets into her Kibas to destroy them, or they have to waste explosives to get rid of them. And then on top of that, Azami has a deagle, which can allow her to make footholes or head holes for a team, and she has barbed wire. Just a really amazing operator that is in desperate need of some changes. Now for Bandit, he's going to be going in the middle of B tier. Bandit has fallen off a lot in recent years, and that's just because there's so many ways to counter him. He's countered by Twitch, he's countered by Brava, he's countered by EMPs, he's countered by Thatcher's EMPs, he's countered by grenades, and he's also countered from vertical play as well. Bandit can just be so easily dealt with in almost every situation, and he can be much easier dealt with than someone like a Cade. The only thing that really goes in Bandit's direction is that Bandit tricking is really strong and can make getting a wall open a lot harder for the attack, but if you don't end up Bandit tricking, he's not nearly as useful. Now after Bandit, we have Castle, who's going to be going in the bottom of A tier. Castle is basically the foundation to a lot of defense strategies on bomb sites, and you can pretty much make a strat with Castle on every site in the game. His barricades are strong for funneling attackers into specific entry points and for wasting their time and utility, and he comes with a secondary shotgun and solid secondary gadgets to go on top of all of that. The only real downside to Castle is that he has the UMP as his primary weapon, which isn't good, but everything else in his kit is amazing. Caveira is going to be joining Alibi in the D tier, and that's because Caveira's entire kit is extremely weak. Her weapons are weak, her gadget is terrible as well because drones can basically counter it outright, and her secondary gadgets aren't that strong either. Overall, Caveira just desperately needs some form of major changes from Ubisoft. And the same thing can be said about Clash, who's going to be going right above Caveira in the D tier. The reason why I think Clash needs a rework is because of the fact that her shield is just annoying to go against, and most people don't enjoy playing against her. And to get utility out of Clash, you have to be extremely coordinated with her team, because she can be easily countered by a ton of attacking operators, and when she's alone, she's basically useless. And so for me, I don't think an operator that is extremely annoying to play and extremely annoying to go against is healthy for the game. Now after Clash, I'm going to be putting Doc in the probably lower half of B tier, and that is because Doc is fun and useful. He comes equipped with the MP5 and an ACOG, which gives him some fragging potential. He has a secondary shotgun to help his team set up the bomb site. He has barbed wire, and he has his stims. The reason why he isn't going higher on this list is because his stims are a little bit niche. If your team ends up dying to mostly headshots, then his stim pistols won't be helpful to your team at all. If Doc ends up going down, the chance of him being able to self-revive is pretty rare, and if a teammate goes down, the chance of Doc being able to save them is also pretty rare because he has to run across the map to go revive them. So Doc's stims can be a little bit niche, but when you do get utility out of them, it can be round changing utility. So overall, Doc is worthy of the B tier, but not any higher than that. Now after Doc, we have Echo, which after the recent buffs to him by making him a 3 armor and giving him an ACOG, I think he has to go in the bottom of A tier. Echo's drones can be extremely strong for supporting your roamers by having them drive around the map and give your roamers intel, and later in the round they can be used to deny the plant, which is another really strong aspect of them. And then on top of that, Echo has amazing weapons in his kit, and he has a deployable shield. You can't really go wrong with picking Echo in any given round. The same cannot be said about Ella, however, who's going to be going in the top of C tier. The reason why Ella is so niche is because her traps just really aren't in the meta anymore. All they really do is concuss the opponent and give you a loud sound cue. Other than that, they don't really do much, and you'd be better off picking other trap operators if you want to get information, like Lesion. The only thing that really plays into Ella's favor is the fact that she has a deployable shield with a really good weapon, but I don't think that's enough to put an operator up into B tier, and so she has to go in the C tier for me. And now after Ella, we have Fenrir, who's another operator that's received a lot of changes recently, and I'm going to be putting him in the middle of A tier. Fenrir is still an exceptionally strong operator. He has a secondary shotgun at his disposal, 4 of his mines, which are really good for stopping the attacker's push because they disorient them and obscure their vision, which is unlike any other trap in the game right now. And on top of that, he gets the MP7, which is a strong fragging weapon. Just a really good operator that you can get utility out of in almost every round. The same thing can be said about Frost, who's also going to be going in the middle of A tier. Frost has a good weapon at her disposal. She has a secondary shotgun. She also has a deployable shield on top of that, and her frost mats are useful for stopping the attackers from being able to vault windows and to also catch them off guard when they're going up staircases. Overall, just a really good operator. Now, next up is Goyo, who's going to be joining Bandit and Doc in the B tier. Goyo is a solid operator on certain bomb sites because of the fact that his Vulcan canisters can waste so much time off the clock. But since his Vulcan canisters can play against his team, there are some bomb sites and maps where you're not going to want to pick Goyo. Now, the one thing that is going for Goyo is the fact that his loadout is so amazing and the fact that he has impact grenades. But still, I think since his gadget can be used against him if the attackers play it right, and since he's so heavily countered by Twitch, I have to put him in the top of B tier. Now, after Goyo, we have Jager, who's going to be going in the lower end of A tier. And that's just because Jager has somewhat fallen off in the meta recently. His guns aren't nearly as good as they used to be, and his gadget is just outclassed by Wamai in pretty much every way. So there isn't really much of a reason to bring Jager in the current meta. But if you do end up bringing him, you will get utility out of him in most situations. I'd rather pick his competition in most situations. No, after Jager, we have Cade, which is also going to be going up in the upper half of A tier. And that's because Cade is basically the foundation of the defense right now. His ability to electrify hatches is strong. He's one of the best operators in the game for electrifying walls because of his Electric Claw's range being so wide, and he has the TCSG shotgun, which allows him to take fights at range and to set up the bomb site for his team. He's just an absolute powerhouse. Now, Kapkan, on the other hand, is solid, but he's definitely not nearly as good as Cade. So he's going to be going in the upper half of B tier. Kapkans are strong against teams that don't drone properly and that don't check their corners, but if the enemy team is competent, they will drone out your Kapkan traps and most of the time just end up shooting them. However, if you do end up going against one of those teams that misdrone his traps a lot, you will end up getting a lot of free kills from him, which is obviously something that you can't really complain about having on the team. He also has pretty solid weapons and a nitro cell at his disposal, so you can't really go wrong with picking Kapkan in lower ranked lobbies, but once you get up into the higher ranks, he's pretty easily countered. Lesion, on the other hand, is, in my opinion, one of the best trap operators in the game right now, which is why I'm going to be putting him on the upper half of A tier. Lesion has a ton of his goo mines, which can provide intel to his team. They can slow the attack because they can't sprint once they've stepped on a goo mine, and he can deal a ton of chip damage to the enemy team as well. Lesion also happens to be a really strong shield counter, which right now shield operators are very strong. So all of that combined with him having a secondary shotgun and a really strong primary weapon just makes him an absolute powerhouse for his team. Now, Maestro, on the other hand, is actually somewhat of a weaker pick, but I'm still going to be putting him in the lower B tier. The reason why Maestro, I think, is a weaker pick nowadays is because Brava basically hard counters him. He's countered by EMPs. He's countered by operators walking up and meleeing his gadget. His cameras are countered by explosives, and Dokubi forces him off his cameras and can even hack into his cameras. With all of these counters that Maestro has, it makes it very hard for you to get utility out of him, especially since a lot of those counters are extremely popular on the attack. But what I will say is if the attack doesn't bring any of those counters, or they bring very few of them, you can get a lot of utility out of Maestro. His cameras being able to zap the opponents and zap their utility can be pretty clutch, and him having the Alda 556 at his disposal makes him one of the best operators in the game for fragging potential. Now, Melusi does have a lot of counters like Maestro, but I think she's still worthy of the upper A tier category. The reason for this is because Melusi has 4 for Banshees now with a secondary shotgun on top of that. And while she does only have the MP5 as her weapon, it's still a solid weapon to use, and she has impacts on top of all of that. The only significantly bad part about Melusi that I can think of is the fact that she's so heavily countered by Brava, but other than that, she's a very solid operator that can bring a ton of utility to the team. Now, after Melusi, we have Mira, who's going to be going in the top of B tier. A few years ago, I probably would have put Mira up in the S tier, but her influence in the meta has fallen off a lot, and that's simply for the fact that she is so heavily countered by Ashe. Ashe is one of the most picked operators on the attack right now, and one of her breaching rounds can just outright shatter Mira's windows. So unless your team brings a lot of protections for Mira, her windows are basically going to get cleared out within the first few seconds of the round starting. However, if her windows can manage to go uncountered for a significant period of time, they can provide your team with a ton of utility. Her mirror windows, when placed in the proper positions, can stop the enemy team from planting, they can get you free picks, and they can provide your team with intel, obviously, since they're see-through. This combined with the fact that she has the Vector, a secondary shotgun, and a Nitro Cell just makes her a really well-rounded operator. Just with her being countered so heavily, I think she has to go in the B tier. Another operator that's going to be joining her in the B tier is Mozzie. The reason why Mozzie is going here in the B tier is because he does get 3 pests at his disposal and the Commando, which are 2 popular weapons, and a Nitro Cell, but the reason why I'm putting him this low is because of the fact that he has so few of his pests. Mozzie can only capture 3 drones in a round, whereas Mute can technically capture an infinite amount of drones. On top of that, Mozzie's pests are only useful for countering drones, whereas an operator like Mute can counter other gadgets on top of being able to counter drones. So in most situations, you're going to want to pick a Mute over a Mozzie. The one way that Mozzie is exceptionally strong is if you plan on roaming with him and then putting his pests in the area where you plan on roaming. This will allow him to protect himself when he's on a roam from getting droned, which will allow him to last longer. But still, in most situations, I find myself picking other operators to do that job. Speaking of other operators, Mute's going to be going in the top of A tier for the reasons that I mentioned with Mozzie. He can deny drones extremely well, and he can deny other things like Dokubi calls or Demo scans, and he has the shotgun SMG-11 combo in his loadout, and he has a Nitro Cell. He's really just a super well-rounded operator that brings a ton of utility to the team. That cannot be said about Oryx, however, who's going to end up going in the bottom of C tier. The only reason why Oryx is not going in the D tier is because he can be useful on maps with a lot of vert play and a lot of hatches. For example, maps like Cafe and Consulate are exceptional for him because he can easily traverse between multiple floors by jumping up the hatches, and his Rambadashes can allow him to run away from attackers when he starts getting pinched. And he also does have a pretty good loadout with the T5, a secondary shotgun, and barbed wire. He's still not an exceptionally strong operator, but he is useful in niche strategies. Now, our next operator, Pulse, is also going to be going in the C tier, and that's because Pulse just really isn't in the meta anymore. His weapon loadout isn't great because he's stuck with the UMP, and his sensor can be useful for allowing him to deny the plant from below, but generally you'd be better off picking an operator like Valkyrie for that job. Like I said, he is useful in niche scenarios where you want to deny the plant from below, but I think you'd be better off picking other operators to do that job because they're going to bring more utility to the team, and they're going to bring better weapons to the team as well. Now, Rook is also going to be going in the C tier right below Pulse, and that's because his Rook armor can be useful because it forces every defender to go down when they get shot in the body instead of dying, and it also allows everyone on the team to revive themselves. But the reason why his Rook armor is so niche is because, just like with Doc, it relies on your team taking body shots. If the enemy team is good and they headshot most of your team, the Rook armor is not going to have any effect on your round whatsoever. And on top of that, the self-revive animation is extremely slow, so the chance of you being able to revive yourself are even slimmer. There are niche scenarios where Rook can be useful, like for example, if the enemy team loves to bring a Kali, Rook is a really good counter for that, but generally you're not going to want to pick Rook in almost any round. Now after Rook, we have Sentry, who I'm going to be putting in the lower B tier. I'm pretty sure this is lower than what I put Sentry last time, but I just don't think the recruits are living up to the expectations I had for them in the meta. Especially now that the Prox Alarm and the Nitro Cell combo is going to get nerfed in the new season, I don't see Sentry being nearly as useful. Being able to bring a deployable shield and barbed wire can be strong, but since you can just bring those secondary gadgets on operators with an actual gadget and probably better weapons, the reasons to pick Sentry in most rounds just really aren't there. Sentry can be strong on strategies where you need those 2 secondary gadgets, but you don't have them available on the operators you're picking, but generally that's going to be few and far between. Now after Sentry, we have Skopos, who's going to be going on the upper half of A tier. I think Skopos, especially after the gameplay I've seen and also from the time I've spent on the test server, I think she's going to be a solid operator. Her ability to rotate in an instant is strong. The fact that her inactive robot can function as a makeshift deployable shield for her team, and the fact that her weapon loadout is pretty strong as well, is going to make her a roamer's dream. The ability to just at whim, when you start getting pressured by the enemies, to just fall back to the bomb site is going to be exploited at the highest level, and I wouldn't be surprised if she becomes S tier after we get our hands on her for a longer period of time. But right now, I think just to play it safe, I'm going to be putting her on the upper end of A tier because she is going to be good in almost every every round you pick her. The same thing can be said about Smoke, who's going to be going right behind Skopos in the A tier. Smoke has been a very strong operator in Siege for a very long time, and that's because his smoke canisters can deny the plant and force the attackers to slow down their push. His shotgun SMG-11 combo, like Mute, it allows him to set up the bomb site and to be a powerhouse in close range, and he has barbed wire on top of that. Just a really solid loadout with a great gadget. Now, the same thing cannot be said about our next operator, Solis, who has had a major fall off in this new season. So I'm going to be putting her in the top of C tier. Solis used to be one of the strongest operators in the game, but with the new overclock mechanic and with the range of her gadget being reduced significantly, there really just isn't that much of a reason to pick her anymore. You're not going to be able to see gadgets from that far of a distance. You're not going to be able to even figure out what those gadgets are unless you activate an overclock, and you're not going to be able to deny the plant nearly as consistently as well for those same reasons. Solis's weapons are still strong and her gadget can still be useful on a roam, but most likely you'd be better off picking an operator like Vigil or Skopos to go for a roam instead of Solis. Now, after Solis, we have an even weaker operator in the form of Tachanka, who's going to be going in the bottom of D tier. Tachanka has needed a rework for a while, and it's for the reasons that you've all likely heard before. His gadget is slow and clunky, leaving him vulnerable for a significant period of time while he's using it. His weapon loadout is decent, but it is also very slow because one of the primary weapons that he has at his disposal is an LMG, which is going to make him even more vulnerable than he already was before. And while he does have good secondary gadgets, it doesn't make up for the fact that his gadget is so lackluster, and the fact that his weapon loadout amplifies the fact that his gadget is so poor. Now, after Tachanka, we have Thorn, who's going to be going in the bottom of C tier. Thorn is an operator that many people have considered to be weak for a very long time, and I would happen to agree with them. Her traps detonate extremely slowly, which allows an attacker to easily walk outside of their radius, and while her primary weapons and secondary gadgets might be decent, her gadget still isn't strong enough to justify bringing in most situations. If you want to pick Thorn just for the good gadget and the secondary gadgets, I can understand it, but you're never going to want to pick Thorn for her unique gadget. Now, after Thorn, we have our next operator, Thunderbird, who's going to be going in the top of D tier. Thunderbird has fallen off massively over the past few years, and that's just because of the amount of nerfs that Ubisoft has been throwing her way. Her healing pods just really aren't useful anymore because they barely heal you for anything, and you have to run across the map to get to them. Her secondary gadgets absolutely suck, and the only thing that really plays in her favor is the fact that she has good weapons, but just like with Alibi, that's not enough to justify her being in C tier. Now, after Thunderbird, we have Valkyrie, who's going to be going in the middle of A tier. Valkyrie is the definition of an operator that's good in every round. She brings cameras to her team, which additional cameras for the defense is always strong because it gives you more free information, and she has her MPX, which is a low recoil headshot machine, and she has the Deagle and Nitro Cell, which can allow her to set up the bomb site and pick up kills with her cameras respectively. After Valkyrie, we have Vigil, who's going to be going in the lower half of B tier, and that's because I think Vigil's kit is pretty strong, him having good weapons and impact grenades makes him a solid roamer, but I think his gadget could use some additional buffs. The reason why I say that is because Vigil's gadget, while it does remove him off of cameras, it still reveals the general location of where he is because of the fact that it leaves those bars on the bottom of a drone screen, which allows them to pinpoint a general location of where Vigil is at. Now, what is nice about Vigil is the fact that he can counter operators like Deimos and Lion, which are common operators to pick to counter roamers. So if you notice the enemy team is picking a Deimos a lot, or you notice they're picking a Lion a lot, picking Vigil can be a smart choice. But I still think Ubisoft could do some additional things to buff his gadget to make it more useful for countering drones. It also doesn't help that Vigil doesn't really bring anything utility-wise to the team that actually helps the rest of his team. He just has a selfish gadget and that's it. But out of the roamers in the game right now, I think Vigil is one of the better ones, so I'm going to be putting him in the middle of B tier. Now, after Vigil, we have Wamai, who's going to be going in the top of A tier. And that's for reasons I talked about earlier when I was discussing Jager. Wamai just quite literally outclasses Jager in almost every way. With all of his magnets combined, he can technically capture more projectiles than Jager can. He has a way better weapon loadout. He has impact grenades, which allows him to make rotates for his team. And he has that Magnum secondary, which allows him to make head holes and foot holes as well. Just a way better operator than Jager in almost every capacity. Now, after Wamai, we have Warden, who's going to be going in the upper part of B tier. Warden is a solid pick in the rounds where you need to pick him. If you notice the enemy team is bringing a lot of smoke grenades, they like to bring a Glaz, they like to bring a Sins, or they like to bring Ying a lot, Warden is going to be an operator you're going to want to bring because he outright counters pretty much any flashbangs and smoke grenades that the enemy team wants to bring. But if the enemy team doesn't bring those gadgets, or you're on the other side of the map from where those gadgets are being used, then you'd be better off picking other operators. Then you'd be better off picking other operators that actually bring a gadget to their team. However, what makes Warden stronger than just being in the C tier is the fact that he has the shotgun SMG-12 combo, which is strong for playing close range and for setting up the site, and the fact that he has a deployable shield at his disposal, which that combo alone is enough to put him in the top of B tier in my opinion. Now after Warden we have Tuberal, which is the final operator to be ranked on this tier list, and he's going to be going all the way up in the S tier, joining Azami. Tuberal is a strong operator for reasons I've discussed multiple times before in videos. His ability to deny a breach is really just unrivaled, because when he throws his canisters onto a reinforced wall, the attackers are just forced to wait out the time. They can't really do anything to speed it up other than to send a Twitch drone inside of the site to shoot the Tuberal canisters off of the breach, but generally that won't work because Tuberal will be looking for that. And so Tuberal, just by existing in a round, can waste 30 seconds off the attacker's time. And once the breach is open, Tuberal has an amazing DMR at his disposal, and he has a nitro cell. Just a really strong operator, that probably should get some nerfs in the near future. Anyways, that about wraps up today's tier list. As always, these videos are strictly my opinion, and if you disagree, feel free to leave your takes in the comments down below. If you enjoyed today's video, I make Siege content just like this twice a week, so go subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter if you don't want to miss the next upload. If you want to watch another video just like this one, a video will be popping up on your screen right now that I'm sure you all enjoy. I'll see you next time, friends, and peace.